Всем привет, welcome back to this channel. If you're new here, my name is Elvin, nice to meet you and thank you for stopping by. I'm an accountant with a dream of becoming a filmmaker, and this channel is my journey as I explore this craft. Occasionally I do photography, like in this case. So let's get right into it. So here's the thing, I don't really want to do what everyone is doing, just twisting some knobs and then showing you how to get to a specific result. I personally want to understand myself, how do we go from one color to another so that we can then make better decisions and actually understand what we're doing. And after some experimenting and playing around, I think I came up with something that may be of help to you as well, because it did help me to understand colors better. And for this we will need Photoshop. So here we are, I opened the image that we are going to be editing, and on your left side you'll also see another image with a color palette. Now this is a random photo I found on Pinterest, but it has a color scheme that I would like to turn this image into as well. And for you to create a color palette, it's actually very simple. All I have to do is just to go to a website called colors.com. I'll put a link in the description. Super simple, just go there, upload the photo you want, it could be even directly through a link, and then it'll allow you to create a palette. You can define how many colors you want and then just press anywhere you want on the photo and it'll save that color. This is a nice way for you to create color references, and in this case I'm also using this as a way for me to understand how we can achieve specific colors. So as you can see, it's mostly green tones, but I also would want to change the oranges, and for that I did also do a color palette based from the movie called Blade Runner. So the goal for you and I is to understand what we need to do in Lightroom in order to achieve a specific color. And the way I figured to do this is actually simply by pulling up your color picker. So what I'll do is I'm gonna pick a starting point. In this case it could be this leaf, and we're gonna try to understand how to turn this color into the reference color, and we'll use this lighter shade of faded green. Now if you're not familiar with the color picker, it's actually very simple. Horizontally you are going to be affecting the saturation, so if I'm going to move the cursor all the way to the left, as you can see I'm losing color until it becomes gray. And then vertically this is your luminance, so if I go up it's brighter and it goes all the way to white, and if you go down it goes darker until you go to black. And if you want to shift the hue or the color, we can then use this bar, and then you have these little arrows right here that we can just drag it up and down. Now the best thing is that you don't really need to guess, you can just jump back and forth between these colors using this pipette and then kind of try to remember what's going on. So for instance in this case we can see that we have a hue that is kind of a green borderline yellow, and then our image is very saturated because it's all the way on the right, and luminance wise is a little bit more than half towards the brighter side. So if we now use our pipette and then select the color that we want to get to, as you can see the hue itself changed to a very rich green color. The saturation has been reduced significantly all the way over here, which is less than half, and also luminance wise it seems like it is lower. So if I go back to my leaf and try to recreate this, I would have to basically change my hue all the way to maybe let's say green right here. Let's drag our cursor all the way to roughly here, and as you can see it already looks more or less this faded green color as what we have in our reference. Maybe I can also drop it down a little bit. Now the fun thing is that it actually turned out to be like a game. So once you reach the point that you think this is the color, then you can go back to your pipette, press on the color you want and see how far you are off. So in this case when I press on it, as you can see I have a little difference in the hue, but otherwise it's pretty much close. Now let's try to do the same thing with, let's say, this branch here. I think I would want it to be this color right here, so the second one from the top. As you can see it's definitely darker and it has a little bit of a different hue, I can see it. So let's already reduce our luminance. There you go. Let's also maybe add a little bit of yellow to the tone. And saturation wise I think maybe a little bit more saturation. That looks kinda okay, kind of similar. Let's see if we guessed it right or not. Let's press on this and Luminance and saturation wise, we were very close, just the hue is different. And now it's early to say, but I think it's a matter of practice. The more we do this, the more our eyes trained to understand what is the hue. So the most important is to understand the relationship between hue, saturation and luminance, because all three of them play a big part in order to go from one color to another. Now, to quickly recap what we did, in order to go from one green to this faded one, we needed to reduce our saturation quite significantly, we needed to darken it, and also we needed to change the hue to a more richer green. And with the oranges, we needed to change the hue more towards a deeper orange, we needed to add a little bit more saturation and also reduce the luminance. Now let's try to apply the same concept, but in Lightroom. So here we are, same photo in Lightroom, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up a reference image. So in this case, I'm going to press this little button right here, and I'll just drag and drop the image that I want to be shown on the left side. Alright, so now let's zoom in over to these leaves. Now it's important for you to remember that there is no right or wrong way of editing a photo. You can start wherever you want, you can do whatever you want, as long as you get to the desired result. Now the reason why I'm saying this is because most of the time when you start editing, you'll start with changing your temperature and your tint, then your exposure. You get all these things out of the way before you start coloring. Now in this case, the photo looks pretty good right now, so I'm gonna try to color it first and then start adjusting everything else. Just remember that whenever you're playing with exposure, it'll also affect your colors. So let's go back to these leaves. Let's scroll all the way to the HSL. So we have the hue, saturation and luminance, exactly what we were talking about just a second ago. Now let's try to do the same thing that we did in Photoshop. Starting with the hue, remember we needed to add more greens. So let's take our green slider and let's just push it all the way to, let's say to here, and then we'll see how it works. Next is the saturation. You remember we had to remove it quite drastically, so let's take our slider in saturation and let's pull it all the way to the left, all the way here. As you can see, it already resembles quite nicely. And finally we have luminance. Remember we had to increase our luminance, so let's take our green and let's increase it. That looks pretty cool. Maybe a little bit less saturation, and that looks pretty similar. I like it. And as you can see already, with the different shades of green, right, and also the darker spots right here, it kind of resembles already the color palette of the image on the left. So let's zoom out, let's see how it looks. Okay, well that's definitely a big change from what we had. Now let's take a look on the oranges. So let's pull up the Blade Runner color palette. Let's zoom in all the way towards the tree stem, and let's do a little bit of adjustments. If you remember, we need to make it a little bit more orange, so let's push the hue towards the right side here, so not too much. If you remember, we need to add a little bit of saturation. Now let's take our orange slider and pull it to the right. No big difference. There we go. And then luminance, if you remember, we need to darken it. So let's take our oranges and darken it maybe like this. So this section right here does resemble this one, and when we look at those brighter points right here or right there, it does resemble these two. So we are on the right path. Now this already looks quite interesting. This is the before and this is the after, but it is not yet moody. So let's try to get it a little bit more moodier, and for this what we need to do is actually to play with the exposure. So let's go all the way up to our tone curve. Let's add a little bit of contrast to our image. So I'm going to take a point right here, maybe let's darken it a little bit. Now I might lift up a little bit this point right here, just ever so slightly. Now this is a very common way of getting this very moody look, because what it does is that it basically adds a little bit of fade to the black parts. They are no longer rich. Again, it really depends on you. I do prefer more richer blacks, but let's see. So far, it's actually not that bad. It resembles those darker areas on this car, for example. Now I'll also make a point right here maybe, and this area right here is your lighter parts of the image, and I'm gonna push it upwards. Now I'm doing this to accentuate the center and to make it pop. Not everything in your Moody photos needs to be completely dark. And also what I'll do is lift up my shadows just to get a little bit more detail within those little branches and those dark corners. I'm gonna also add a little bit of texture because, well, there's a lot of texture in this picture, so just adding a little bit of crispiness to them, not too much. Now what I think I'm gonna do is I'll go all the way down towards our calibration. This is a really cool tool that allows you to get interesting effects out of it. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I will take my greens and I'm gonna push it over a little bit more towards the blue shade, and let's see how that affects it. And as you can see immediately, it gives it a little bit of that bluish hue, but it also makes our oranges pop even more. Now, of course, it already goes a little bit away from what we had in our original image, but if you look closely into our reference image, you can see also the same kind of hues over there in those mountains. So having a little bit of that blue hue does still conform to our image. Now next what I want to do, and let me actually close this reference, I want to add again more moodiness, and I'll do this using a radial filter. Basically create a vignette. So let's click on it, let's draw a circle, maybe even an oval shape will be better. Let's see, and then let's go to our sliders, let's reset what we had here, and let's just drop our exposure a little bit even more, just like this. Maybe I'll just make it smaller. Make sure that you have enough feathers. Sometimes 50 is not enough, because otherwise what you'll have is this very clear sign where everything was darkened. For example, if I remove this to 0, you'll see the circle. So let's go back, press on this dot, and then let's give it maybe a nice 70. Yeah, let's put it to 70. The reason for this is because the more we feather, right, the more smooth the transition is, which works really well when it comes to like light coming in from the center. Yeah, that looks really cool. Now what I would do maybe is also play around, maybe I just add a little bit of sharpness. Let's zoom in just to make it pop a little bit. This is actually quite important, both this sharpening and also texture. Why? Because when you want to upload, for example, for Instagram, the compression will kind of blur the image a little bit. So having a little bit more sharpness will then push it backwards to the original setting, so then it'll look nice and clear and sharp when it's in Instagram. This is just like sprinkling some condiments on this photo. And I think we're done. This looks really cool. If I go back to our reference, let's look at our greens. So let's zoom in. We have those faded greens, nice and moody. Our darker greens have this borderline gray hue, very nice. It does look very similar to our reference. And also if we drag all the way down to the lighter parts, these lighter parts do also have a little bit of green there, which kind of resembles what you have on the far distance on those hills. And if we look at our Blade Runner reference, really cool. So as you can see, it's very saturated. Of course, this color palette doesn't have all the colors, but if we do compare these oranges that we have on the ground, they do resemble the stuff you see on the ground here as well. So it has a little bit of the nice Mars vibe to it. I really like how this turned out. So this is the before and this is the after. You can see how big of a difference color grading makes, and it actually makes this image look much more interesting in my opinion. And now if you want to apply this also to other images, you can either directly do a copy paste, or you can even save it as a present. Let's go to our settings, copy settings. Let's check all of them, copy. Let's go to another picture I have here. Let's go settings, paste, and let's see how it affects. Okay, looks pretty cool. A bit too dark in my opinion. What I would do is I would go to my radial filter, let's switch it off just to see what's happening. Alright, so in this case definitely I can see that it looks pretty cool, but it'll definitely need more work in the exposure settings. So we can go up all the way and let's see. So we have our shadows up. Perhaps what we can do is we can increase our whites just to brighten up a little bit. Highlights we can drop it a little bit down so that we still retain that detail in the walls. Perhaps I can lift up the shadows even more, just so we have more detail within the leaves. And well, I don't like how the fade looks here, so I will actually remove it completely. And then let's go back to our HSL. So what I can see already is, in this case, for instance, for my liking, the oranges are just a little bit too much. So let's take our saturation and let's just reduce it a little bit. Just like this. It's pretty cool. That's the before. That's the after. And also maybe let's give our water a little bit of a faded look as well, since we're going for this kind of a faded moody look. So let's go to our aquas. By the way, if you're not really sure if you need to change the aqua or the blues, you see here this little dot, just press on it, and then you can just hover your cursor on a specific place and the specific parameter will be highlighted. So as you can see here, it's blue, and then I can even press and I can drag it to adjust it. So I can, for example, increase the luminance, but as you can see, it also affects the aquas because they're mixed in together. And then I can press the same button on the saturation, click and then drag it so I can remove a little bit of that color. There we go. Looks really cool. And then if you want to add a little bit more moodiness, maybe darken a little bit the sides, once again we still have the radial filter. Let's go back, let's switch it on. So maybe let's not darken it so much. So let's select the filter, let's increase our exposure, let's brighten it up, and let's close. This is the before, this is the after. Yeah, this is good. And once again, accentuating the middle and guiding the audience's eyes towards what to look at. Now let's save this preset so we can use this in other photos. Super simple. On your left side, you have a tab called presets. Let's press on this plus minus, create present, and then name it. So let's say Moody Greens. And you can select what you want to save. Let's say everything except for the filters. Deselect graduated and also radial filters. Then press create. And it's going to be showing up here under user presence, and then you have this Moody Greens. So now if you reset the whole color grade, we can always go back to our presence, select Moody Greens, and then it will apply it without the filters, of course, which you can then add later. And that's it. As I mentioned before, this idea of using a color picker in order to understand how to go from one color to another is something that I just came up with, so I cannot say that this is going to be working all the time, but I'll definitely be experimenting more with this. Actually, I'm interested to know whether or not this helped you out. Do let me know in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and I see you in the next one. Пока!